Hi, Paul. We can see you. Can you hear us okay?
Okay, now.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, great. We're in a new room. We're moved from the gym to the cafeteria, so we're just kind of doing some tests, but we should start any minute.
Okay.
We all set?
I need to make, Chico, the way that you do it, do you want me to make you spotlight for everyone? That's what I did in the past.
Sure.
Okay.
That would make this camera the main camera for people to see.
There you go. And what we do, Chico, so you know, is we flip back and forth. So when we start, I usually start with the screen. And then if we have people that talk or something like that, we go to the full screen of all the board members. Does that make sense? Okay, terrific, terrific. There's my screen.
No.
So what's a little different, Chico, the way that it's set up is I'm trying to go down to share my screen, to put the agenda up there. It's not letting me do that.
Are you the?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can do it if you're spotlighting him.
I've done it all along.
Not what you meant, not like-
I mean, that's what we did in the other space.
Is the bottom through?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. He knew one other kid, and then he's made a group of them.
I don't want to do that for sure.
Six of them that they now have a Snapchat group together.
I learned that the hard way, like my second meeting.
Go play football on the quad or whatever. Yeah. So yes, I think he has.
Somehow-
He's already gotten a fair amount of homework. He's doing.
That's what I want to do.
so
That's what
good.
I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually I
It's a
just go
little weird.
click and there.
Cursor down below.
No, they can.
Is this
Yeah.
your screen?
Yeah. They have to wear
I
masks
think that's the
inside.
video. It's actually the
But yeah,
video.
there's no restriction. Outdoors, they don't have to. And there's no restriction on numbers.
Off of the,
Yeah.
CATV,
But that is what we've always done, Pete.
spotlighting it.
Every week.
Just wondering.
If we don't spotlight it,
Every week he goes. Yeah.
what were your suggestion?
Well, I was just wondering whose computer screen, I know I'm looking at our view right there. but
Right.
Whose computer screen?
I think it's my screen.
Okay. So I was seeing a share screen at the bottom there a second ago.
So I can go here. And I think that'll fix it. Are you seeing that?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
And before we begin, we just announced the community members will be able to participate in the meeting either by attending here in person or through Zoom, via telephone or video conferencing. The physical meeting here in the Lebanon Middle School is open to the public. And let me just point out that the Zoom meeting audio-visual may or may not be reliable throughout the entire length of the meeting. We're offering it as a convenience, but we can't necessarily guarantee that it will work for the full 3 hours or however long we go.
I need to ask
So
Pete
just,
a question, sorry.
go ahead.
Pete, are we recording for sure? I don't want Richard to go on if we're not recording. I see the red button down there. It's blinking, so I just want to triple check because we record to a laptop. That's
Recording? I am recording.
That's the CATV recording. Are you also doing the Zoom recording that's going to go down on to your laptop? That's my question.
Yes.
Both?
I'm recording it on screen.
Perfect. Sorry, thank you.
And finally, masks are required for anyone who attends the meeting in person. So I'll call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We will have public comment during the public comment period of the meeting, and that will be done in person by raising your hand or via Zoom, raising your hand. And anyone who comments during public comment, we ask you to identify yourself and the ward in which you reside. Public comment is governed by the board policy BEDH. Additions or deletions from the agenda. Superintendent has asked me to exchange items 7 and 8. So we will, after the consent agenda, we will move on to unfinished business. And that will then be followed by item 7, the SAU leadership team updates. Are there any other additions or deletions?
None?
Okay, we'll now open the meeting to public comment.
There are no members of the public, and I'm not seeing any hand raised for people who are attending via Zoom.
Public comment is closed. Correspondence. I asked the secretary to report on correspondence we've received since the last meeting.
Sure. We had 12 pieces of correspondence that were received from the last meeting. One piece was regarding a plea to wear masks full-time for this school year. We had 5 pieces of correspondence regarding offering to help with the track fundraising committee. And we had 6 pieces of correspondence regarding the budget process and the SRO position for the next fiscal year. And 2 of those were from individuals that resided outside of the service area of the district.
And all of these letters can be seen on the SAU website under the board documents, under the subheading correspondence for this particular date. Consent agenda. We need to approve non-public minutes from the June 9th meeting. May I have a motion to do that, please?
Make a motion to approve the non-public meeting minutes from the June 9th, 2021 meeting.
Moved by Lillian, second by MJ. Comments, questions? All in favor? Unanimous. We need to approve the public hearing minutes from the last meeting, August 25th. A motion for that, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the public hearing minutes from the Wednesday, August 25th, 2021 meeting.
You. Moved by MJ,
I'll second.
second by Lillian. Questions or comments or corrections on those minutes? All in favor of accepting them? Raise your hand. Unanimous, thank you. And the public minutes now from the August 25th board meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the public minutes from the Wednesday, August 23rd, 2021 meeting.
Moved by MJ,
I'll second.
second by Lil. Are there any corrections or questions about those minutes? Hearing none. All in favor of acceptance, raise your hand, please. Unanimous. We have nominations. We need to approve nominations and acknowledge resignations and retirements. A list has been provided. It's a 2-page list provided by the superintendent. Can we do them both together, Joanne? Or would you like to do them
Yes.
separately?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, we need a motion to acknowledge and accept the summer hires done in August 2021 and nomination resignations for September 8th, 2021. And after the motion, we'll have the opportunity for questions.
Make a motion to accept the summer hires for August 2021 and the nominations and resignations for September 8th, 2021.
Moved by Lil, second by MJ. Are there any questions about either of these sheets? MJ?
I just have a question. On the summer hire, is that middle school math teacher a full-time position, or is that a part-time position?
Do you know, Tim?
I don't know that it's part-time, but I couldn't explain the logistics of how it's part-time, but I happened to talk to John today about that position, and I know it's part-time. I think it's 0.6, right, as shown here.
And what,
0.6, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, just so we can be clear.
Any other questions? Okay. All in favor of accepting both of these sheets, please raise your hand. Unanimous. Okay, we're now going to move down to item number 8, unfinished business. And the first piece of unfinished business is discussion and action on the ESSER projects.
So last spring, we talked about the different ESSER projects, and there was a focus to move forward with the 2 projects at Mount Leb Elementary School, the nurse's office and the behavioral space, otherwise known as Cub Care. And I'm just trying to pull up, here it is. So Paul Marinese from Marinese Architects is a panelist here to be able to answer the questions. So I met with Gino and Paul and Margaret, who's also from Marinese Architects. We walked through Mount Leb over the summer. This information is similar to what was in the packet last week in regard to the cost for the project. And I asked Paul if he would mind being able to answer any questions about the project itself or questions about the cost for the projects. He also put together additional information of cost from the renovation projects from the prior year. And we updated the trifold with the new information for the budget so that they would all match. So those are the different pieces. So I think we would start off with any questions about the Mount Leb school renovations. These projects were conditionally approved through ESSER funding, so we did get that information. And you might not have questions. I just thought better to have the architect here to answer anything about cost or, you know, the time frame for this is this summer coming up. So I think we didn't do a vote by hand. I couldn't remember if we did that before. But we definitely had the approval to go ahead and move forward with it. So at this time, I think it would be just good for the minutes to actually have the vote to put this amount forward. So if people look back at it, they can say, when did the board decide this and to use the ESSER funds for it? Because the next steps would be finding a project manager, doing the RFQs. I always get my P's and Q's literally confused. So, and working together to set it up for the summer so we can finish the project then.
So you're asking for a motion to approve the expenditure of $350,000 in ESSER funds for the Mount Lebanon school renovations.
Yes, for the nurses suite, and it's this called special services renovations, so it's the behavioral space. That would be great.
Have a motion for that, please.
Sorry, I have a question before we have a motion. I thought that today we were coming to prioritize the ESSER project.
This was already prioritized last spring,
Okay.
so we went ahead with it. That's why I separated the projects out.
I just wanted to make sure it was clear
Yeah.
what we were doing.
Yeah.
Should I can make a motion. All right, I'll make a motion to approve the nursing suite renovations or modernizations?
Renovations,
at Mount Leb School, as we have discussed, with the ESSER funds.
And the behavioral
Oh,
space.
and the behavioral space.
In the amount of $350,000.
Sorry, I need a script. In the amount of $350,000.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Aaron. Questions about this specific project? MJ?
Well, I just want to confirm, I guess, with Paul, that by doing the nurse's office and behavioral space, that all dovetails in with the future renovation project, and we'll be able to continue on with that proposal without making any major changes?
Yes, that's true. This was one piece of the larger project, and we're just taking the small piece and bringing that ahead of the rest of it.
I had a quick question now that we're looking at the multicolored trifold. I'm looking at it in color on my computer screen. So there's the special services in light blue, and could you just maybe, are all of the things in light blue the ones, I guess I'm a little bit confused about the plan from in the packet from 2 weeks ago versus this.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be good, because we're talking about all these different projects, to put the trifold back so you could see. We would be considering with the board a different type of project for Mount Leb. So here, it has the front entrances and things pulled forward. You can save money by taking the current entrance and pulling that section forward, and you'd still get a principal's office. You'd actually have an assistant principal's office, which Katie doesn't have right now. And then you could use the conference space for a conference space. So that would take care of that. The walking up to where the school psychologist is would probably remain the same, but she pushes in a lot for the students. And then the other things that were approved by ESSER, but we haven't talked about here, is the expansion of the multipurpose room, which is on the right-hand side. When we met this summer, we talked about, actually, could you pull the multipurpose room forward, giving it that extra length, instead of pushing it into the parking lot? And then could we do the cooking kitchen to the kind of right-hand side of the building, so kids could come in and kind of loop through? And that might be a better footprint. So that's why I don't really use the word modernization. It's really a renovation at this point. It's like, what can we get done with the smallest amount of footprint changes and large costs that can come with that? And Paula would talk probably more about that with the other ESSER page. But that's what would be taken care of here, is the nurse's office wouldn't move. It would stay right where it is, which is beneficial in some ways because it's in the middle of the school rather than out on the wing in the front. And it expands it. We would take that door that no one uses, and that door gets pulled forward, and that becomes a wall with a window for the nurse's office. And that actually helps, because people get confused when they go to Mount Leb, like, which door am I supposed to go to? And so she would have room for 2 cots. The bathroom there would be ADA, meet ADA requirements, which it doesn't right now. And so the footprint expands into that corridor, if you've been in Mount Leb, right now, which is kind of the isolation space for students. So would take care of that. The behavior space would stay the same. It's on the hallway on the left as you're heading to the multipurpose room. But what it does is it takes that space, which is just one large space, and divides it into 2 classroom learning spaces with a hallway. So you would walk in, and you would have a room to the left, a room in front, and you would have a room to the right. So it divides that space up, which was something that we talked about, and we're able to get conditional approval for based on what we are seeing from COVID. All the ESSER funds are related to, due to COVID, this is why we are working on X, Y, and Z. Paul, are there other pieces of the project that you'd like to talk about from the architect perspective?
Well, we've looked at a few different options this year. There's a few pieces that have been talked about with regards to the multi-purpose room in the kitchen. Right now, the trifold that we've given you is exactly the same plan from a year ago. We didn't go in and change anything at the Mount Lebanon School floor plan because that's still in flux, what we want to be looking at for next year, or this coming year. So right now, the plan of Mount Lebanon on trifold is exactly the same as last time around. And then, I don't know, Joanne, can you share the different budgets for the options, multi-purpose room in the kitchen versus the options you looked at with that?
Yeah, I think that for this motion, we're focusing on just the nurse's office and the behavioral space. They'll do a vote, and then if the chair goes in this next direction, we'd look at the other page that has all the different projects that you've updated.
Okay. So for those two spaces, I think you covered it pretty well. We pretty much did the least impact necessary to accomplish the space needs goals. At the special services area in healthcare, it's fairly simple work. We're pretty much just adding walls, existing walls and ceiling are staying, and we're adding some new casework to replace the counter and sink that are there now, just because the configuration has to change with the new floor plan. But we're really doing kind of the minimum work necessary to make it a really functional space, but not redoing anything more than we have to.
Tim, I also think that, and I just wanted to mention that the items below that are not included in the architect's work, these are things we talked about with Tim Carney, and our understanding is that ESSER funding will cover those types of activities too. So although this is the Marinese architect part, there will be additional funds that we will have to figure out as we go through the process and say to the board, that's how much this is going to cost to come out of ESSER. Because those things, I believe, are allowed. Is that accurate, Tim?
Yeah, if the project is approved, everything that goes with the project is approved. You know, Paul just lists these because these are typical things that are not included in the contract with the architect. And as you'll see, 3 of those 6 things there's non-anticipated costs associated with them, but they're just typically things that are listed and are the owner's responsibility.
Tammy, you have a question?
So I'm just trying to figure out the 275 in the spreadsheet, because it's not 185 plus 75. So how does that, the general construction, where does the 275
I didn't put
come
the
from?
estimate together, so Paul, you'll have to explain the numbers, please.
Yes. So what it is there's other work in the general construction that's not in those 2 specific lines. Yeah, we should have added a 3rd line, taking it's actually what, 10,000 off. The other 10,000 is for miscellaneous code upgrades throughout the building, which we'll have to do with the work in the building. Sorry, I didn't point that out, but yeah, 275 is correct.
Okay. And then administrative costs, those are things that you, within your company?
Yes. So architect and engineers obviously is designing the building, and the ESSER consultant is a separate consultant, not related to us, that the school district is going to hire to coordinate all of the accounting that has to happen with the federal government and the state regarding ESSER. There's a bunch of paperwork that has to happen. So you guys are going to hire that person to handle all of that for you, make sure it all goes smoothly. But that's all that's in the administrative costs of those 2 things.
Okay.
Aaron?
So for the behavioral space, we're adding all these walls, but we're not mentioning anything about HVAC. Are we going to affect the airflow in these spaces?
Yeah, we are modifying in the behavior space, we're modifying existing mechanical system to feed all the spaces with the code-required airflows. In the nurses area, we're putting a whole system to achieve better ventilation and also air conditioning. So it's all built into the project.
Stephen?
Tim, I know you mentioned last time the concept of conditional approval. Can you just review again what the risk is that ultimately this doesn't get approved, and then where does that leave us?
Well, I think it depends on how the motion, if you make a motion to use ESSER funding for this project and it doesn't get approved, then I guess we wouldn't go forward. But so we have, instead of kind of flying blind and just saying, hey, can we do this, and having them say no, we did go through the process that the state created to say, I'm kind of summarizing, but basically their email said, yeah, we like these projects, and as long as they meet, we wanted them to say, yeah, go ahead, and then we'll do the final approval. But it was saying these are good as long as they meet requirements related to COVID. So it was a conditional approval, but it was, with a typical sort of out wording. So they know of this project, and they know what we want to do. We don't anticipate anything any different answer since it's not a different project. But if you say use ESSER funds in the motion and then that doesn't get approved, then I guess that would hinder the project. But we would, we'll be putting in, if you guys approve this today, we're going to be writing the grant starting next week. Meanwhile, there's all these different things going on at once. So Paul's working on the stuff he has to work on to put it out to bid while we're getting the grant approved kind of thing. So I don't anticipate an issue with it going out to bid without us knowing it's approved kind of thing,
Thank you.
I have a question about this, the missing line. Paul, you mentioned 10,000, but it's 15, correct?
Well, I thought the site work, I wasn't sure that 5,000 threw in there, but yeah, okay. Yeah.
So it's 15,000. Could we have a better understanding of you mentioned building-wide upgrades?
The biggest piece of that is the fire alarm system. Right now it's on one of the walls that's going to be changing, so we're going to move that. So that's kind of a placeholder. The majority of that to cover the fire alarm system, either rewiring the location or modifying the system that's there and extending that head-end system to somewhere else, has to move to the location.
Any other questions? Is Roger with us via Zoom? I wonder if he could read back the motion, or if someone could read back the motion.
Hello, Roger? Terrific. Could you please read back the motion?
No other questions? We'll take a vote. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so that takes care of the Mount Leb nurses and behavioral space that we've been talking about for quite some time, on the assumption that would be done. Now, Joanne, would you mind, either you or you and Paul, walking us through the other options here and what you need of the board?
So I would be happy to, and to start it, and Paul, please hop in. What you're seeing here is what was put forward, I believe, in 2019 as part of the renovation projects. And when Paul was doing the work for the Mount Leb 2 projects, I asked if he wouldn't go back and update the numbers so that this board would have a sense of, in today's world, with the rates of construction and things like that, how much things would cost. Not all of these are approved ESSER funds. So when we look at Lebanon High School, new security lobby, music suite, student center, those did not fit to a due to COVID. So those are just updated numbers if the board wanted to put forward perhaps a warrant article to do that work. It just gives you an idea of costs. Lebanon High School, Hanover Street site improvements, we did not put in for COVID related for those, but that gives you an idea of cost. At Hanover Street, on the second page, we did put in for the cafeteria, and because that was due to COVID. The challenging part with Hanover Street, as I've mentioned several times, is the cafeteria. So if the board wants to put forward the cafeteria, there's really not enough ESSER funds to do the projects that we did plus the cafeteria. I wanted to just see, since I was putting in the cooking kitchen for Mount Leb, I just literally put everything I could think of into the grant to see what we could get conditional approval for, so that we wouldn't have to keep circling back, because it's taking 3 to 4 weeks for them to review projects, and we just would never get them done in time. So I just put everything I could think of in that grant. And so the concept is, where it's a little helpful to look at the trifold, is that if you were to add the cafeteria, that takes up what we would call the blue room. A lot of people refer to that because the flooring color is blue. There's other terms for it as well. And the nurse's office at Hanover Street School, and 2 of the classrooms. Because in order to build that cafeteria, you have to take those rooms out. And so that's where those additional rooms go off the wing. So, ESSER funding was probably not the best way to go for the cafeteria. 1, because there's not enough money, and 2, you couldn't just do the cafeteria. You'd then have to find additional funding to move those classrooms, renovate those classrooms, and add classes off a wing. So the work at the renovations of Hanover Street School that we've talked about in the past is, as you walked in, there would be a new entrance. There would be, the administrative offices would look differently. Access right into the building would look differently. And then we talked about the cafeteria or not. And then last time, there was board discussion, there was an option of doing an upper level off the addition in the front, and we elected not to do that. There was more of a cost to building up over the top than building out off a wing. So that's why it showed the way that it is in the trifold. And so I think the rest of it's pretty straightforward. If you go into Hanover Street, you go down the hallway, that's the reading support and special education, intensive needs. It's a bit of a maze back in there. So this would allow rethinking of student support services and how the flow would be better for our staff and our students. And we talked quite a bit about counting the number of classrooms. We talked about where the spaces would be. We talked at that point about moving the art room forward, taking the library, moving that to the front, and pushing the building forward. So there are lots of pieces to the Hanover Street School project that are mentioned in the trifold description. And then the Mount Lev renovations were the new main office, which we didn't go forward with ESSER funding, but the nurses' room is in there. We did get approval for the multi-purpose room expansion, as well as a cooking kitchen over at Mount Lev per conditional approval. And we didn't specify toilet renovations. Part of the reason that there's a phase 1 and phase 2 is the conditional approval is conditional approval. Then you have to go get your designs. You have to prove that you're going to meet code, and then you bring that forward. And that's how you get your final approval to use ESSER funds. So we're in pretty good shape as a district because we at least know what we have conditional approval for at this time. And then we can just focus on where you want us to put the energy to get that second phase, that final approval for it. So that is an overview of those pages. That's a non-architectural overview. Paul, I'm sure there are things that you would want to add about the different projects here.
Well, there's a lot of pieces. Like you said, it's what's shown in the triangle was the same project from 2 years ago. We haven't gone back and restudied anything yet because we asked for that. So this is just a reflection of all the discussions that happened 2.5 years ago. I guess where we would move forward from here is if the board wants to look at some alternatives, some pieces of this, we can study that and see what the cost would be and how to work with ESSER. But right now, this is just bringing everything forward from 2 years ago, not getting the numbers.
Tammy.
So can I just, so to clarify, that high school is not approved for ESSER funds. Hanover Street School is not approved for ESSER funds.
The cafeteria was.
The high school cafeteria was.
The Hanover Street School cafeteria, I could show how, due to COVID and providing nutritional meals is important. The issue is it's such a cost, you don't put in cost, you put in the concept. And so if we put in the cost for the cafeteria, the board would not be able to use ESSER funds to complete the whole project there.
So a piece of the high school for the cafeteria is covered, and then there's additional Mount Lebanon pieces, is the ones that you mentioned, the nurse, the multipurpose isn't covered on the one we
It
just
is.
did. It is on the first one that we just did?
No, I'm sorry, it is covered by ESSER.
Right.
It's not something we talked about last spring, because I didn't know if we would get
Right.
funding for it.
So there's a few pieces on the Mount Lebanon school renovations on the second sheet that are covered by ESSER as well.
That you could bundle, yes. Because if you're going to expand the multipurpose room, you might want to consider doing the cooking kitchen
Right.
at the same time.
Do we have an idea of what is not? I mean, it's kind of hard to judge when you have little pieces that are covered and made more that are not covered. So is there an idea of a number that is not covered?
Or that is covered, either way.
Right.
So Paul, if the board were to consider expanding the multipurpose room and adding a cooking kitchen to Mount Leb, would you be able to provide a budgeted amount similar to what you were able to do for the nurse's office and the behavioral space?
Yes, yeah, we can do that. And you want a floor plan that shows what would be happening if those spaces were covered?
I think a visual is really helpful.
With that, can I follow up on that? With the multipurpose room is next to the stage, and the stage is listed on one of these renovations for Mount Leb from, previous iterations. Is that something that could be, like, looped in? They're right next to each other? I mean, it's the same it's the same room, essentially. I'm
I
not
have to
really
go
sure.
back and triple check. I mean, when I described the multipurpose room, I talked about all the activities that were going on in it. And so that is one of the activities that goes on in that space. But I would want to triple check with the people who did the approval to see if that could be included. And I don't know, Paul, when we looked at pulling the multipurpose room forward, I don't think we talked about moving the stage. And a key part about the stage was accessibility. But what we learned is you could purchase a ramp that slides under the stage or goes somewhere else. And if you need somebody who needs accessibility, you could just use the ramp. Once again, we're not trying to go where we were 5 years ago. We're trying to be modest in what we really need for the buildings and the renovation project. Did we talk about the stage moving is that my?
I mean, I guess, sorry to interrupt, but I guess my question is the stage actually relevant now that we have, if it doesn't need to be renovated, then maybe we take it off the list? I mean, I guess, I'm not sure. You don't have to
Correct.
answer now.
No,
I'm just
correct.
saying-
Like, I've not stopped trying to think about how we could get the projects done and asked Paul, how could we make it accessible, usable? And one idea was, if you're not going to move it all around, you could purchase a ramp if you needed it. And I don't know other aspects of it. Last time we walked through, Paul, I don't think we talked a lot about the stage.
Right, the only reason we were moving the stage and redoing it was because we were expanding the multipurpose room towards the parking lot. If we instead expanded, if we're not doing the big addition in front of the building, if we expand the multipurpose room in that direction, so we're in front of the building, the stage should be able to stay where it is. We shouldn't have to mess with that, so yeah, it should be fine. If we go that way, I think you want us to look at all the options for how to expand the multipurpose room, and then we can decide which one we need to test. But I think when we talked about it walking around, it seemed like expanding towards the front of the building would be the most economical.
Can I say one more thing to finish what I was thinking? So, is there, it's kind of hard to judge with it the way it's written. Is there a way to get it presented in such a way that it shows what's approved for ESSER? And then in conjunction with that, if there are going to be construction or renovations that have to be made or should be made at the same time, but they're not approved by ESSER, if those could be categorized together so that
Kind
we
of a
could know.
spreadsheet.
Yeah. I mean, just a little bit more connected, I
Yeah,
guess.
I was just trying to figure out where you might want us to head this evening. I did it as a discussion and action just to have it there. Board can always decide to do an action at any point, but the feedback's really helpful
Yeah.
because, and it's great that Paul's here because he'd be pulling it together.
Yep.
So.
Piggyback on what Tammy said, so I think to pull it all together, I like Tammy's idea, but then it'd be also helpful if in the next packet, we could have Tim update the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3 by, it looks like we had a total, we have to spend, or can spend 80% of it, and 20% has to be allocated to learning loss, so my back of the envelope looks like we have about 2.8 million total to spend before the nurse's office. It'd be kind of nice to kind of tie that back in then to the line item so we can kind of see what we're spending.
Lillian?
I mean, I agree. I think it's hard for us to prioritize when we don't know how much their individual pieces are going to cost, even a guesstimate of how much they're going to cost. So it's hard to say, yes, we can do this, because I'm looking at, project number 6 in our list of ESSER projects from before is this replacement of Lebanon High School technology server and switches and all that.
Yep.
Do we know how much that costs?
120,000.
Okay, great. So that's helpful, because then I can see,
Yep.
that's a piece that we can afford. maybe.
Sure. That would be part of what we put together in the list.
So in answer to your question, MJ, I did the math. The 80% requirement only applies to ESSER 3. So it's 2.994, 2,994,000 between the two of them that don't have restrictions for learn. They all have restrictions, but you know what I mean, for learning loss.
So it'd be kind of nice to have the spreadsheet with, like Lil said, the total next to each of what we estimate the cost, and then what we have to spend taking out the 80%, seems how we know we have to hold that back, or sorry, taking out the 20%, seems how we know we have to hold that back anyway.
All right, so we understand, we understand then what we need in order to wrap our minds around the Mount Lebanon renovations. I'm not completely sure where that leaves us with the Hanover Street renovations, because, and I guess one question that I have, when we've discussed this in the past, and we're going back almost 2 years now, when we talked about limiting, for example, this particular project, which right now is costing out at $13.4 million, basically what we were told was, well, you really can't. If you start doing one, it leads to something else, and that's the total amount that you're looking at no matter what you do. And I wonder if that's still the case, or if we can do a similar analysis on the Hanover Street project as well, to break some of these things out, again, so we can be in this position to prioritize them. Because, when you look at the sum total, it's a rather large amount. And I understand, Joanne, what you've been saying, that you can't construct a new cafeteria without, in other words, I'm looking at the top, you really can't separate the bottom two, the bottom two items, whatever the actual cost is, without the second floor addition.
Right. And
But some of the others, perhaps, I guess my question is,
they're not COVID related.
can they, or can they be separated out, or not? Whether we fund it from COVID funds or somewhere else.
I see.
I'm just wondering if it's possible to give us some options here where it wasn't an all or nothing thing.
I think, Dick, what you're saying is true, and I think, Joanne, you pointed to sort of the domino effect of this, right? That if you do this thing, it does this thing, then that thing. And I think it would be helpful to lay that out, right? What are the pieces that cannot be done by themselves? As we just talked about with Mount Leb, there are pieces that can be done by themselves, which is really helpful. And so if we can have the same kind of categorization for Hanover Street.
Right. So we, Marinese Architects, we had a request for proposals in 2017. We went through a process. We narrowed it to 3 architectural firms. We interviewed them at Finance and Facilities, and then came forward, and the board approved it. So I felt comfortable getting to this point with Marinese Architects. it will cost. So I didn't feel comfortable saying, Paul, please redo the trifold so it could be a little bit more easier to figure out, because I'm limited by what the board approves for cost. So I think what's important is that, you know, based on what you're being asked to do, Paul, do you have a sense of cost? Because I'd like it in the minutes that the board is approving that cost. If it's an ESSER project, it circles back. If we get the approval, it gets paid for out of ESSER. But I just want to have that in the minutes, so we're not going ahead and not having the board's input.
Sorry, Paul, before you jump in, I agree. I think part of it is that if we had more specificity in these line items, it's not about a new trifold or a new drawing, but more specificity in the line items of what they mean, right? Because if we're looking at, like in Mount Leb, multipurpose room, stage, toilet, kitchen addition, well, now we're thinking about separating kitchen addition as a specific thing, multipurpose room as a specific thing, as far as funding. So just separating out that line item a little bit, I think helps us.
Yep, and that's what Marinese can do, and I think it goes back to what Richard's saying is, can you separate out things again? And restart the conversation about what are possibilities. We learn something every couple of years, so we'll just keep working on it.
Can I, I mean, I think that, I mean, I'm not asking them to do any additional work. I just want to be presented with the information they have in a different way.
In order to get to the level that you're looking at, I will need to have them give me additional information. And that's, you know, because I can't break these down in my head any more than they've been broken down. And to redo kind of the concept that you're talking about doing takes time to do it. So, I mean, Mount Leb is pretty straightforward, but talking about Hanover Street School and what the different possibilities are, going back and getting cost estimates for that is a cost. And I don't know maybe Paul would help to get a sense of how much that work that you've heard the board ask for might be.
Hanover Street is tricky because if you only want to do, say, half the pieces, that has domino effect, as we talked about many times, everywhere else in that project. So we have to make sure that we're picking it apart and making sure that if we say, okay, we're not going to do the new media center in the office, okay, what does that mean? It's a whole new floor plan, because it changes 6 other things in the plan. So Hanover Street is really complicated that way. It's not like Mount Lebanon where you can say, okay, we're going to do this, we're not going to do it, we're going to do that, we're not going to do it. If you change any piece of it, it changes all the other pieces. So yeah, I can't give you a number right now because you have to give me some guidance on exactly what you want us to do. But we've done this a couple of years now, reworked things several times, so we can give a sense from past years about what it costs to get. I don't remember exactly what, but I don't know, it's probably like around $20,000 or something like that to do the whole process all the way through, coming up with all the different permutations, doing plans. Maybe we can color code plans in each section of the work. So for instance, special service renovation, Hanover Street, we can highlight that as one color. And media center and office renovation addition, we can highlight what gets affected if we delete that piece of work, something like that, so it's more graphical in terms of the board making decisions, not so much for public presentation, but so you can get a sense, looking at the plan of what each of the pieces are that you could pull out of one horizon. So I'd say that's probably the amount of work we have to do something like that, rework the plan, looking at implications of pulling out 1 or 2 or 3 pieces, and then putting that together in some package that is easy to understand and compare the budget with the plan.
Paul, I have a question, and this just may be my ignorance, so that's fine, and you can tell me that that's the case. But if we're looking at talking about the Mount Leb school renovations, you've got these 3 line items here that are sort of many things grouped together, and you've updated this information. In order to update that information, did you have to price out these individual pieces to get these 3 line items? Does that make sense?
Yes, for all these new budgets that we've given you, we've priced out, updated to bidding it, 2 years from now, so it went to vote next March. We've updated everything to that point, based on feedback from contractors. We talked to 3 different general contractors, got their feedback for our price submitted, and prices are headed up pretty dramatically because of most of the labor. A also some kids materials, but right now labor is a big issue.
Right, so you have that information already, because in order to get to these numbers, right, at least for Mount Lem,
We have it as a percentage increase
Yeah.
across the board, but not,
individual.
not like piece by piece at Hanover Street, that's complicated, but just generally speaking, we applied one, inflation factor to all the different pieces from 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one final point to make about the Hanover Street School. I think what I'm kind of hearing from everybody is that, you know, we do have priorities. I mean, we've been talking about the cafeteria, and I know way before I was on the board. I mean, that's been a thing since my kids were at HSS. So I'm struggling with the idea of like the absolute necessity of a cafeteria in Hanover Street, and yeah, figuring, and a kind of huge cost. I admit I was a little shocked by the numbers, even though I've been following this for years. So I don't know what to say about that, but if there's a way that even if the cafeteria project entails a ton more stuff, even if some of the renovation, which would be the cafeteria, could get covered potentially, I think I would like to see, you know, what is the kind of minimum thing if we needed to do things in stages. I don't know how things are going to happen, but if we did it in stages and said, okay, we're going to do the cafeteria and whatever, figure out where we're going to get a couple classrooms, like that maybe the cafeteria would be covered, and then the other thing would have a different price tag that would come from a different funding source. Somehow, I think what we're all kind of trying to figure out is like, what, you know, that's a humongous project. So I don't want us to be all or nothing and say we can't afford $13.5 million, so we can't do it. I would love us to say we can figure it out somehow, like cobbling together the necessities and different funding streams, if that makes sense. Because I worry that such an important part of our district, like having an actual cafeteria in an elementary school, which could be funded, is going to kind of get lost in this huge price tag.
I think we'll have to, when Tim pulls it together, he can actually let you know by putting these items in, kind of what's left, and then be able to go back and look at what this cost is. And then, Paul, are you clear as to what they're asking you to do at Hanover Street School, so that the next meeting we can provide what information they're looking for?
Next meeting, we can't have, I'm not sure exactly what they're looking for, like, we talked about breaking out pieces, but we have to know which things we want to break out, because there's a lot of different options that you could try to pull out. The most basic project that involves the cafeteria would be the cafeteria piece plus probably 4 classroom additions, those 2 pieces together. And I think you could do those 2, apart from everything else, I think. You have to look at that, but that shouldn't affect too much else in the rest of the building. So that's one possibility. But there are a lot of, we've done this for years now. We've looked at 8 different possibilities for what you could pull out, what you could not pull out. So we have to go back and look at what we looked at 2 years ago. Some of the questions might be answered. If there's different questions, we can certainly look at those. But I think you have to tell us exactly which pieces you want to include and not, or which combinations of pieces.
MJ.
I think even maybe going back and having a summary for all of the current board members, because some of this has been talked about long before several of us were on the board. So kind of having that comprehensive overview of these are the 8 different iterations that we did. This is what we pulled out here. This is what was standalone over here, would be very helpful to kind of reframe it for this current board who hasn't been party to all of the previous discussions.
I agree, and I hear what you're saying, Joanne, about wanting to kind of have approval for giving them the go-ahead to do that. And I think that's kind of, you know, when we're talking about these big projects, those kinds of architectural costs are sort of small potatoes. So I think it's a cost that we're probably going to have to just absorb, because we need the information from the team.
So Paul, when you were talking about the $20,000, was that for the work for Hanover Street alone, or that was for the 3 buildings? Now, there's the addition of doing the summary, which I think with all the documents should be able to be pulled together because we have documented things over time in the different folders. Is that 20,000 for all of that work? Because if they're going to do a motion, I just want to be clear on the amount.
Yeah, I think in past years, it was 30-something thousand for everything from like where we are now all the way through the vote. So I think 20 might be not all the way to the vote, but just to pull together all this information they're asking for the different buildings. Yeah, we've already done not Lebanon for the most part, so it's mostly Hanover Street. I think we're talking about right in high schools, fairly simple. So yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good number for pulling together any information that the board would need for making decisions of what to move forward with.
And what would the time frame be for that?
Well, I guess you have to let me know for sure which pieces you want us to look at, and then probably maybe a month, roughly, depending on how much detail you want for plans, plan changes.
And if there are board members that want to be more specific, please feel free to let Paul know how detailed you want him to be, because I think he's asking all of you, what do you want him to produce?
I can be more specific.
Yeah, great.
I'm very encouraged by what I heard just a couple minutes ago, because it was the first time in 5 years that I heard that it was possible to carve out a substantial chunk of the Hanover Street School project as a freestanding project. So I would suggest, and I don't know what else people think about this, but we could ask Paul to, as he just mentioned, carve out the bottom 2 lines, a new cafeteria and adjacent renovations, and the 4 classroom addition. I mean, that is almost half of the general building construction. And that's going to flow down, that's going to flow into administrative costs and contingency as well, right?
There's also life safety upgrades you have to do, so that's part of the first number.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you're looking for some guidance, I don't know how other people feel, but it seems to me that would be something that we could look at.
And my input was just if there are some of these things that are listed kind of in the summary that are covered by one of the ESSER funds, then it should be noted that they're covered by ESSER funds, and we're not going to have to try to fund another funding source for those things. So I mean, in order to understand it, I think I need to know what's covered by ESSER and what's not.
So in Mount Leb, we just approved the previous project for the nurses' space and the special services room. So those would need to be taken out of Mount Leb, separated out. But we also want to separate out the multipurpose room, not the stage, because we're not talking about the stage anymore, right? Multipurpose room, separate. Kitchen addition, separate. Unless those things have to happen together, right? And that's another thing we need to know. If the kitchen addition has to happen at the same time as the multipurpose room, those are, we think, ESSER covered. They're provisionally ESSER covered, right?
Yes, and Paul, that is my understanding, that your recommendation is to do them at the same time? The multipurpose room at Mount Leb and the kitchen?
Well, at the same time as each other, or at the other one?
Yes, because in order to expand it, you lose the heating kitchen, because the kitchen would become part of the multipurpose room. So if you were just to expand the multipurpose room, you don't have the warming kitchen anymore. You need some kind of kitchen.
Yeah, I think we expand to the front of the building, that's correct.
Okay.
So it would definitely be, it would make sense to do them together and be more economical.
Joanne, what do you need from the board to get to step 6 or whatever this is? To get, what would you like to leave with tonight for
A
Paul to do
motion
his work?
a motion to have Marinese provide more detailed information regarding the renovation projects, and our end of it would be comparing it and doing the worksheet with the spreadsheet that you talked about. So Tim, do you have any questions for the board about the spreadsheet, what they're looking for?
Well, I guess if I can just speak it out loud to see, I think you guys are wanting a price for all 6 of those pre-approved projects.
Yes.
Okay, and I just want to make sure we're all square that, there's $2.9 million. So if you put a price, those 6 got approved just to see if they could be covered, not the idea that they could be under this. So, and if you do a project where you think like, hey, we're going to do this and this, and it comes out to $3 million and there's $2.9 million, that means you can't only do the COVID piece of it. So if you do a project and it's more than the COVID money, then you got to fund the whole thing, which means probably general fund, because a bond has to be approved and there's no guarantee that it's going to get approved. So I'm just saying that for context.
No, that's good.
So a bond has to go on the warrant and has to have 2/3, what is it, 60%? I can't even remember now, but.
We could also do a warrant article, I believe, that says, I'm making up a number, I'm not even looking at the page. The board is put forward the renovation projects of building X, Y, and Z of a total of 15 million, of which 3 million of it would be paid out of ESSER funds. That people would understand that a bit more, but we would still have to fit the timeline to make sure that the ESSER funding, if it's ESSER 2, it's used by 2023.
Yep.
If it's 3, it's by 2025.
Right.
So,
Right.
there are different ways of being able to express it and get it out. But I think this is a good first step of kind of understanding where we are with the ESSER grants, what we got approved. It's good to know that there are some additional options. We'll put that all together.
So I'm clear.
Paul, you have enough information for them to be able to put a motion for the $20,000?
Yeah, you just have to give us a little more specifics on which option you're looking at for Dale Street, but we can work that out.
MJ?
So can I just go back to Tim, though, when you do that, which I think would be very helpful, having this list with dollars attached to it, just put an asterisk next to the one that is not a standalone project, because my understanding, it sounds like on this list, the only one that can't be a standalone right now is the Hanover Street cafeteria, because you then have to do the extra 2.1 million on top of it out of a different funding source. So that would kind of be helpful to know, too, that this would be funded by ESSER, but you also, in order to do it, you have to find the funding source somewhere else.
Okay, has anyone heard enough to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve up to $20,000 expense to Marinese for revised plans in accordance with the feedback received tonight from the board.
Second by MJ. Anyone want to provide further information, ask questions, comment on the motion?
If we have some kind of priority list, each of us, of should we send it to Joanne? I mean, I'm just not really sure once we get the numbers, or maybe you just give us a heads up in advance when we have the numbers to tell us, like, because sitting around here, it might be great if we somehow, each of us had sort of a list in our head and we could share that so we don't,
What we could put out a bit in advance is Tim's work, because we have the project list. We have, like, the technology is 120,000. Where we might have to wait is for Marinese to give us additional, but at least you'd have the list to start thinking about it, and you'd have the information that we have as of, next week. And then it looks like, Paul, you could give us, I need the information a week in advance, so I was just looking at my calendar. So the next month meeting would be October 13th, a month from now. 13 minus 7 is 6. So like October 6th, if you could have, is that possible to get the information?
I think we have to do a first pass, just to give you a proposal for the pieces we'll be looking at combining. And then you might want to pass it by the board at next meeting, just say, yeah, this is the question one in hand.
Okay.
Just so we can narrow it down to a concept we'll be looking at more detail.
Okay, that's helpful.
After next meeting, yeah, that's good, or they want to do it this way, and then we can get into it and work
I believe that's September 22nd, just so you know. Okay.
So I'd say, if you do that at the next meeting, just make sure that we're on the right track, then, it would be a few weeks after that, so it might be the third meeting from now. It'll be all done.
Okay.
There's a motion on the table. Any further discussion?
To Kristen's point, which I think is a good one, I think I can't prioritize without the costs, right? Because like I could prioritize by like what I love on this list, right? Or prioritize about what makes me happy on this list, but I'd rather, I feel like it's unrealistic to prioritize until I know the actual costs of things or the estimated costs of things. So I guess that's why I wouldn't feel comfortable prioritizing until I knew that. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah, we're not going there yet. We're at where are people wanting us to put money toward marinades to digging a bit deeper. Then they'll provide us information, and then you'll have another round of actually having more information to make a better informed decision.
Anything else? Okay, let's vote on the motion. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Moving on to discussion on Lebanon High School track fundraising campaign. I wonder if it might make sense, before we talk about the fundraising campaign, to provide the board with a little bit of background on what Finance and Facilities has been looking at in terms of the construction costs and so forth, because we looked at another scenario. Aaron, are you prepared to talk about the project itself at this point, or should we have Tim walk us through it?
It'd probably be more coherent if Tim did it. But I can get started anyway. We were given a budget for the track and the extra lanes. The quote for the extra lanes was about double of what the regular size track was, based on the locations of some lights and the stands and some drainage and all that would have to be moved to make the larger track work. Did I get that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So we're kind of focusing on the same size track that we already have and going with that in that route. And that came out to 1.097 million. Anything else, Dick, before we talk about the fundraising side of it?
No, I think that's
Okay.
that's kind of where everything we had at Finance and Facilities condensed down. But
Then we looked at, we have 5 correspondence for people that were interested in joining the fundraising committee. We just looked at that real quick. We didn't make any decisions. Dick talked to a couple since then.
right, let me fill you in. Joanne and I had a discussion with Tracy Hutchins, who's the director of the Upper Valley Business Alliance, who was very supportive and very helpful, and provided us with some suggestions on different approaches that we might use to recruit people to join the committee who would be well connected within the Lebanon community and the Upper Valley generally. And she also very generously provided us with a mailing list of all of the Business Alliance members. So when we get to the point of doing asks, that's going to be a huge help to us. And we were very, very grateful for that. One of the volunteers, one of the people who volunteered is Brooke Herndon, who is Director of Development at the Vermont Law School. And I spoke with her just day before yesterday. And she has really extensive experience running fundraising campaigns. She wanted to underscore the fact that she's relatively new to the area and wouldn't be in a position to probably go out and be asking for major gifts, but I think she'd be a tremendous asset in terms of helping us structure the campaign. And this is something we would have had to have outsourced, so that's great. We also had other people who have volunteered. A couple cases, I asked them to provide a little bit more information in terms of what they would bring to the committee, and 2 other people seemed like they were a good fit. I let them know that as soon as we have a large enough mass, we can get that committee established and start making plans for how to proceed. And the consensus seems to be that we ought to be able to do that by the beginning of October. So that's where that stands now. The ad that we put out, ran in the Valley News, still exists on the SAU webpage. It's also being sent out to all the members of the Upper Valley Business Alliance. So that's going to help hopefully generate some interest in people willing to work with us.
I saw it. I received it.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Are we at discussion stage? Yeah, as I had emailed to you guys like a couple of months ago, I was very intrigued by the thought of the eight lanes, just based on the possibility, Lebanon could in future host divisional championships or various things like that I guess it used to do in the past. I understand maybe it's unrealistic to think about that because it is like a huge extra construction project, but is it anywhere within the fundraising dream to say, maybe we can go for an 8-lane track if we have whatever, more corporate sponsorship or whoever. I'm just wondering if we should still kind of float that on some level at this early stage, and if it looks like totally unrealistic, then we, drop it in a couple months. But I just wanted to bring that up.
When we saw the spreadsheet that Tim gave us, it was heart-stopping.
But also too, it's not just the cost, it's the what's involved in that project.
Right.
Yeah.
So all the pieces, so you, just to name a few, you would have to add 6 more feet to the track footprint that it is right now. You would have to change all the subsoil under that area. You would have to move light poles that are there, 4 of them. The viewing box would have to be disassembled or destroyed and reassembled or moved in order to be able to fit in another track. The dugout would need to be moved, and then you'd have to build a retaining wall to be able to support the place that was once a dugout. The driveway north of the field would be shifted, right? So it's not just, could we get the funding? If we got the funding, it would necessitate a whole bunch of renovations that would take those fields out of commission in a lot of ways and take that area out of commission. And it was just a big disruption. Whereas before we were thinking it was a project that could be completed, I think Dana's not here, but could be completed in a summer, right? That's what we were saying.
Right.
So that's why.
8 weeks.
So we're thinking about time because it's too large of a project that
Well,
it's,
and the fact that it's so much extra to do it. It's nearly double, like they said, to do 2 more lanes.
And it sounds like the time is almost double too, or?
I don't know about the time. We didn't say, they didn't give us the estimate on the time, but it would be much more extensive time-wise just to get all of those things done.
What was the other consideration, Aaron, about, or Tim, about adding, the lanes would have to be added to the inside, is that right?
They have to be added to the outside because the inside,
That's right, the inside is going to be.
It's funny how much you start paying attention to tracks as you go around to football games. I was down in Manchester last week and looking at the track. That track is built at its most narrow allowed by rules turning radius. So you can't go inside because those inside lanes are 2 turns. So you have to go out, and going out, that's including, the thing we left out is the bleachers all got to move back, and it's concrete on the bleachers, so you got to take that up. So, I mean, I get it. I'm a track dad, but the 2 more lanes for $700,000, it doesn't seem to make a cost benefit. Most tracks you run to in the state are 6-lane tracks,
okay.
my opinion. 3 kids in track.
Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, we'll keep you all informed. All right, we're going to move back now to item number 7, leadership team updates. We'll start with the superintendent.
Sure, you'll see in the packet an outline of some of the larger things that I've been working on. I also had an opportunity to meet Jack Finley over at Hanover Street. We were timing the different groups of students as they came through the cafeteria to pick up their meals, and it was wonderful to see the children. They're just adorable and so excited to be back at school. I walked through the building and got a chance to see our teachers and staff because we decided to do our fall gathering virtually. And so it's really, I love to connect with our staff and say hello, and that was just a great way to spend part of the day, and I'll be heading into the other schools soon. So kind of lifting the voluntary testing has taken a lot of work, but I think it'll be worth it. I've learned to navigate their system, adding in information, ordering the testing kits, coordinating the drop-off pickups, and all the aspects of it, answering parents' questions, board member questions about voluntary testing. I'm not an expert at all in it, but every week I learn a bit more about how it all works. So that's taken a lot of my time. There's at least 7 emails and pieces of data that I'm entering in on a daily basis. That's just kind of the setup. I think once it gets going, it'll be easier to manage. I sent superintendent letters to different stakeholders in regard to our mitigating layers after the board meeting for the back to school plan, and also have kept people up to date regarding COVID cases in our school. As you can see, we've been talking a lot about ESSER fundings and how to use the ESSER projects, the ESSER money for projects. I did put in a lengthy application to try to use part of the 20% for a diversity, inclusion, and justice facilitator, the equity audit, and other targeted work in this area. I haven't heard back yet, but that has been submitted. As far as the Superintendents and Social Agencies Summit, I have a meeting that's coming up again and ongoing conversations with Alice about putting that together. That takes place at the SAU. I attended the school board policies in response to recent legislation webinar, and they said that their update should be coming out in the next few days. As far as the last sweep of legislation, they've been working on the policies to bring forward. So I'm keeping up to date on that. Part of policy committee created the agenda, sent the materials. We unfortunately didn't have a quorum, so the policies that we were going to look at on that day will be combined with the policies that I had slated for October. Quite a few of them are withdrawal policies. I'm trying to balance each meeting as best as I can with new ones, revised ones, and ones that are being withdrawn. FNF, we talked about the ESSER work, and Richard mentioned coordinating the meeting with Tracy. PNN, just a reminder that on the 14th, on the agenda, it will say 4 p.m. because that's for everybody, but there's a 3 p.m. meeting at the SAU prior to that. I talked with Lisa about EC communications, and I'll be meeting with Lisa and Karen tomorrow about EC. I participated in the Hartford Area Career Tech Center. Erica Schneider is the interim director of that. We talked about student enrollment. We talked about different programs that they're putting in place and changes that they have to make. They are interested in potentially bringing back and their cybersecurity. So I reached out to the high school to see what kind of offerings we have that they could create something that's really unique for students that want to get into that field. There's a lot of work into that field. And then, Lisa, this is a connection with Lisa because she and I have been talking about when you fill out the Power School registration, your choice for gender is male or female, and that's because all that data gets pulled directly to the state. But what I was talking about with Hartford and what they do is they have an internal form that students, they can add to it non-binary or whatever it is. So we could have this big Power School registration sheet that pushes out that, but we could do kind of an internal one for parents and students who really want to share that information as part of our community. So that's the way I was able to problem solve that to move forward with that. We can have that in place. Let's see. Lots of communication with board members, keeping you up to date. There's so much happening in our schools, and I know you get lots of emails from me, but as I learn things, I just want you to know where we are, or things you might be interested in, like the commissioners' conversation and things like that. I'm worked with the LSS president, and there's an agreement on custodial vacation pay, as well as paying the paraeducators for subbing. Communications with school administrators and music teachers, so how we were going to do physical distancing for those classes. Setting up meetings with school administrators and the business office regarding providing meals. There's all kinds of federal and state regulations surrounding meals and point of service and pickup and how paras can support and can't. So we've had multiple conversations about that. We've conversations with Dartmouth regarding virtual meetings with the high school and the SEED program. Talked about a request for a sabbatical, and I think maybe in the next year or two, we might be getting requests for sabbaticals. It's the first one that I've had, and I'm heading into my 8th year. So I think that things kind of come and go in school districts, so I think down the line, we might see more sabbatical proposals. Student services support meetings and communications with statewide and local superintendents. We're just trying to stay in touch with what we're doing as a state, back to school plans, voluntary testing, all of those kinds of things. So those are some of the key things that I've been working on. Any questions?
MJ.
Scott, just follow up on the voluntary testing. So when do you expect to begin, and have you had a high response rate from parents?
I don't know population-wise percentage. When I go in, there are many people that have signed up, but many's not a specific term. I just know I was like so glad it worked, because I popped in, I'm like, oh, please have this work, and I saw a whole, like many names. So the high school is slated to start advisory the 13th, right? The 10th. If we can pull it off, because advisory is huge with the number of students that we would have to do. And the elementary schools is Monday the 16th. Just looking at my, the 13th. So the high school, we're going to try to do advisory if we can get all the supplies here on the 10th. And the 13th would be the first start in our other schools. And some of our schools are 2 days. And then some of our schools are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in order to get all the students, because we have a large number of students coming in. But we wanted to push it in the front of the week, because if there was a positive pool, we wanted to be able to get consistent responses through that week with the testing of it. And that was the recommendation of Concentric, to do it that way with our district. So we are launching it pretty early. We're going to have glitches, but I think the idea is a great idea, and we'll just figure it out. It'll get easier over time. And I just want to say that people think the nasal swab is the one that some of us experience, that had that very long swab. It's a Q-tip, and the students literally get a Q-tip and they rotate one nostril four circles and the other 4 circles, and they put it in the test tube, so it's non-invasive and it's fast. So with advisory, because the students are older, we feel we could get it done, because they can take the swab, they can do it, they can stick it back in a tube, and if anyone needs help, we can give them help. But we're going to see how that goes next week, end of this.
So I have a question about the letter that you sent, the message about the codes and everything. It was, the code didn't work. So I'm wondering if we should send out another message that is just only has so that people can subscribe, because it was also kind of buried inside.
So I had the letter, and people were putting in LMS dash and the letters with it, and that's why it got complicated. So I sent a second letter shortly thereafter explaining it. That was just separate. It wasn't my superintendent's long letter. It was just, if you're experiencing these issues, don't put the LMS or the HHS first. And then I had a parent who asked to get it removed, so I learned how to remove a student that was in the system. I can send it out. I'm not, I had a flurry of emails and was able to, like, my email pushed out shortly after my letter because I contacted the rep, and I'm like, I'm getting these emails, can you help me out? There will be another superintendent's letter that goes out that I can add it in. I can't start piecemealing all the things I send because I would be sending stuff constantly.
Well, I'll just explain why I'm concerned about, because it seems like if you start on the 13th and you have students who are not buying in, or if you have parents who are not buying in yet, then the tone that gets set inside the classroom is one of perhaps noncompliance. I mean, I don't know if that's what could happen, but if you don't have a group of kids who are already on board to get tested, you could have social dynamics that work against the pool testing in total. That's all I'm worried about. So if our goal is to get as many students to test as we can get, then it seems like going ahead in the communication so that everybody who perhaps would like to get their student on board can get their student on board, but sometimes that takes more time.
So as soon as a parent clicks it, it falls under tests and it updates the entire system. And so my next superintendent's letter will have on Friday, really excited we were able to put this together today. If you're interested, because there's also the flip side where their peers might be getting it and they're not doing it, and maybe they want to do it. So I think the timing of trying it with advisory on Friday, with my superintendent letter going out Friday, because even though I consistently wrote it's voluntary, it's voluntary, it's voluntary, I had a lot of emails saying, you can't pressure me to do this.
No.
Is it voluntary? And it's just trying to reach masses of people. So I have over 2,000 people read each of my superintendent's letters. And if you think about some are reading it on a phone, it doesn't really, it's tiny and that's a lot. And then I'm trying to balance that now the principals are back. Parents are gonna get principals' letters. And so I got some feedback last year that, you're over communicating because we're getting it from you and you're getting it from the principals. And then I will hear from people that there's not enough communication. And why are you sending this again? Because, so I value that input. And I think by making that correction, it helped for those. And I understand where you're coming from, that doing a second round after we've tried it, and here's the information. And parents talk to each other during the week, and they're like, oh, I signed up, and somebody will be like, oh, I forgot to sign up, and they can say, oh, don't worry, it's going to be in her next letter.
So the rule of marketing is 7 times,
Yeah.
the basic principle of that. And so when you send it twice, and then the principal sends it again, and then you send it again, and then they talk about it in advisory and all of those things, those are all different times that but really a lot of times just to make the action, it takes that amount of time. So
I know.
it's good that you're over communicating.
I'm trying to over communicate, but I value where you're coming from. And just know that was my kind of thinking is, let's hope advisory is a pretty positive experience. Starting with high school kids seems to make sense. And then they talk to their siblings who might be a little bit concerned and be like, oh no, it's no big deal, we just did it at the high school. Because there's a little anxiety, I'm sure, for
Well, I think the other thing that is going to be anxiety producing is what happens if they find out that they're the ones who are positive. I think that teachers working through that in a social space together is going to matter a lot to the kids, because if there's going to be like outing, or there's going to be a social ostracization for being positive, which
it's not really any different than what we experienced all last year, and I'm very cautious about that. And some people want me to give more detail, and there's a fine line between HIPAA and medical things and what I can say. So, I can say a second grader, but trying to dwindle it down to a second grader in Mrs. So-and-so's class brings it to another level. I can say a second grade staff member. I can say, and the students were on a bus.
Well, I guess
parents
I'm just
want that additional
do the teachers who are
information?
helping to do the pool testing, do they know what the protocols are going to be so that they can help?
Yes, because the only people who have access to the data is myself, the principal, and the school nurse. So it's the same thing as if a parent calls and says there's a positive case, it's this pool of students, we have a potential positive case, we would contact those families because they would need the second testing coming through.
That isn't my
So-
question, though. My question is, do the kids know that process? Do the kids understand that process with the pool testing? Because we understand that process, but I'm more concerned about the kids understanding that process.
Yeah, I could definitely, I have SALT tomorrow, and we're talking about the whole topic of all the stuff I've been doing to set the system up. So the next part of that conversation is, we now have ordered tests, we now have a system running. What is the next step? We're going to advisory on Friday. So I think that all fits in with a good communication line, and we can definitely clarify it. We've talked about it, but some students at developmental ages,
Won't
it's a lot of
understand.
information,
Yeah.
but you're correct. There are some students that we could simply explain what the steps are, and if there's a way to decrease any anxiety, I'm happy to do that. So, sure, we could do that. Probably middle school makes sense, and then certain teachers might share it with their classroom based on their grade in elementary school, to kind of say, here's where it's going next. So that's helpful, yeah.
All I wanted to add was that the test that you're talking about with the Q-tip is what they did all last year at Dartmouth. And I did that probably 25 times last year because I was on campus teaching. It's so easy. It takes literally like 10 seconds a person. You can easily do it yourself. So I would imagine any kid, at least 7th grade and up, can do it.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it'll go quick, and it's not painful. It's not the huge, horrible thing at all. It's absolutely painless and fast, so.
Their video shows lots of younger kids doing it on their own at the elementary level, because that was the concern of how much time this is going to take. But I appreciate the feedback, because it's helpful to just hear where people are coming from, and I can definitely put those steps in place, so thank you.
I just have another question, and this is probably a question for Concentric, not for you, but you might know. Do we have the possibility with Concentric, if we decided to do it, which is not part of our protocol right now, but if we decided to do it based on the future, do they have the ability to do the test to stay test? So where if a child in a class tests positive, then instead of just having all those kids wait and see, that we have just the close contacts do a test every day for the next 5 days or whatever. Do we have the possibility of doing that, or is that not something that Concentric is set up to do?
That's not what I'm hearing they're set up to do, and we quarantined classes at the middle school because kids interact so much during the day that it's very hard to say, you didn't talk to somebody, because when you add up 10 minutes, it happens really fast.
Right.
So I don't know if that would get us what we're trying to achieve with it. I really just kind of want to see if we can get this off the ground, but keep that in mind, and if you want me to look into it, I will.
As a question, because we don't know yet, because we haven't done this, we don't know how many kids we're even talking about yet, but based on infection levels and sort of the infectiousness of this, I think it would be helpful just to at least know that if it's a possibility, if we decide or don't, just to know, to ask them if they have that ability.
Yeah, and to clarify assigned seating, our buses aren't individually assigned seats, they are by grade. We have some buses with 60 some odd students in it, and so to have the bus drivers try to memorize that this is where that person's supposed to sit, not next to that person, at least by grade. We do know who's on a bus, so the reality is if there's positive testing, we can trace that way if we need to, but I just wanted to clarify that it's not by individual seat. We're doing our best we can by grade on the buses. Thank you.
Anything else? By the way, thank you for sending out the copy of the grant application that you wrote. I thought that was really well done.
Oh.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I didn't share it with the whole board. Maybe I should send it out.
Maybe, no, I think you should.
Okay.
I thought you had.
No, okay,
If there's no reason not to, I would do it, because it's
okay, thank you.
really well done, and I thought it captured our reasons for doing what we want to do very well.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Business administrator update.
Oh, the only thing I have for today is I just wanted to announce that I had a file by September 1st, what I call it, well, it's not what I call it, the DOE 25, you're like, what's that? Department of Education Form 25. It's a financial report of the district, all the revenues, expenditures, our balance sheet. This was filed on September 1st, and it needs, they're okay with it. They have a new process this year, we do it online, and then need board members to sign it if you don't mind. Between today or even the next meeting, if you want to see it, I can email it to you. It's 25 pages of spreadsheet, which you're certainly welcome to look at it. That document goes for a lot of different statistical reasons, and most importantly is the tax rate. So, well, the education part of the tax rate. So I appreciate you signing on it. The fund balance is where I report that. The unassigned fund balance, we shoot for $1 million, and for the revenue or the expenditure part that we spent a lot of time focusing on during budget came in at 1.2, so a little higher than I wanted. But there are a couple other parts of a fund balance. It's all of your, it's not just how much money surplus, people like to call it. It's not just surplus as far as unexpended. So we have that $307,000 in revenue. Well, the number from the city was, I think, 285, but the total overage on revenue, we collected more revenue than we anticipated, was $307,000. And that mechanism, it flows back, when I say flows back to the taxpayers, that's $307,000 we're reporting to the DRA that we received in other ways. So that's $307,000 less they're going to let us raise in the fall. So that's how it flows back to you. And the last piece is an accounting adjustment that the auditors had me make. Some checks were written, well, we wrote some checks in June of 2019 for a due date of July 1st, 2019, the new fiscal year, especially our bond payment. And we write them right at the end of June, put them in the mail, so they get there on July 1st when they're due. But don't you know, the mail worked quickly and the bank worked quickly in June of 19. So that bond check and a couple other checks got cashed before July 1st. Yes, that means the bank didn't pay attention to the date on the check. Doesn't mean anything to you except that the auditors made me reserve fund balance from last year because they want it the same month. If you know anything about accounting, they want everything in the same time period. So I had a reserve fund balance from last year to cover that, and so the fund balance from this year that was meant for those checks is released now. So last year our fund balance was $397,000 lower to cover that check, those checks. And I say cover, I just mean financially on the books. It has nothing to do with money in the bank. But this year, $397,000 more comes back. So the fund balance is going to offset your taxes is $1.9 million. 1.2 is our expenditure piece, and then those two pieces of hopefully one-time things. The revenue hopefully won't happen again. I mean, it's all budgeting, right? So we've always been within $20,000, $30,000 on revenue projections in the 7 years I've been here. But this year we had that influx. And that other thing, we went to ACH with the bond company, so now they will release the funds right on the day. We don't have to worry about the mail anymore. So that was annoying. So that one, what that means to you is your tax rate will be about 45 cents lower than you told the voters last year. So that $900,000, we planned on $1 million and told the voters your tax rate's probably going to go up about 86 cents per thousand. That's what we said last budget period. Now it's going to be 1.9 million, that $900,000. That's about 45 cents on your tax rate. So reduces the increase from 86 cents to about, 40 cents or so. That's rough numbers. The other piece to keep in mind, and we'll talk about more during the budget, is when we made the budget, we were planning on, hopefully you remember this, well, the new board members won't, but the free and reduced lunch numbers in a district drive a lot of how much funding you get from the state. And the numbers the state gave us last year were based on October. They're always based on October, but the numbers across the state for people who enrolled in free and reduced lunch were low. And it was, but we budgeted wisely based on that low projection of dollar amount. Then the legislature went to work and they passed a law right before they dismissed in June that restored every school's funding back to what it was 2 years ago. So that, and I'll have the exact numbers when we get to budget time, but that means we're going to get some $300,000-$400,000 more than we budgeted because we didn't know what was going to happen during the budget process. So that's another good news as far as the tax rate being lower than projected. Figured I'd give a good piece. I know the fund balance and discussion, I try to shoot for $1 million. I can't control the one-off things that happen. And the good news of that being higher than we'd like is it does make your tax rate lower than you thought. So if you want to review that, any of these numbers, I email it to you. If you would just like to sign, we can sign it tonight. But certainly anybody can review this form. All the information gets broken apart. So if you go to the DOE website and you see cost per student or how much special ed costs, it all comes from this report. Somebody out at the DOE dissects it.
So I just have a question about free and reduced lunch. Did it go up or did it go down?
So you mean the numbers of people enrolled?
Yeah.
Well, it increased over the year from October of 20. That's when it was, usually they take a snapshot of October 20, and then the money is based on what you actually have at the end of the school year. There's not usually a huge variance between those, but for some reason in October, maybe because people were just coming back from COVID, a lot of people had free lunch, including we, like for everybody, but the need to fill that form out, the form is still crucial. So for whatever reason, schools across the state didn't have very high enrollments in October, and they did increase, but by the end of the year, they weren't where they were 2 years ago. So the legislature passed a separate law saying at least for this year, we're going to hold everybody's free and reduced numbers as to what that district was 2 years ago. So it helps every district in the state.
Do you think that comes from the additional assistance that was happening from the federal government? Why do you think those numbers would be lower?
Well, I don't think, and we're doing it, that brings up another opportunity. We are doing free again this year for all students. But I don't think it doesn't help. I don't know what the cause is, but it doesn't help the messaging when we say everybody gets a free lunch if you want it, but please fill out that form anyway. Because you don't have to fill a form out and you're still going to get a free lunch. But if we don't get that form back, then those are the numbers we report as free and reduced eligible. The free to everybody is a separate COVID thing that the government has put in place. But the forms and the approval of your free and reduced lunch drives a lot. It's not the only thing that drives it, but that's a main piece of the funding puzzle from the state.
That's huge.
So tagging it, so how are we funding it this year to make it free for everybody? Is there an extension of the
Yeah,
COVID fund?
the state, the federal government extended it another year.
For the entire year? 'Cause
Yeah.
I know last year, didn't it end in December and then they extended it or something?
Well, yes. I don't want to make you an expert on USDA. You'll go like crazy, but the programs, they technically end at the end of the school year, and so you have to say that until they open up a new program for the summer. And then they open it, so it's seamless to everybody on the outside, but in the federal government's mind, they're boom, 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 boom. So it did end, and then it immediately started again. So, and we, you can bow out any year you want, but we chose to keep in it. It worked pretty well. Again, what it does is replaces the funding stream comes instead of a parent paying, which a parent can still pay. We've had some parents say, I want to pay anyway. That's certainly fine. But instead of the parent paying for the meal, we tell the government we gave a meal to that child, and the government pays us the same amount, just about the same amount of money.
So are you tracking it differently this year? Because my understanding is that now the kids have to actually use their PIN number.
We are, so yes, now you're really in the weeds, but this actually goes to a lot of what Joanne, this goes to what Joanne was saying about the conversations we've had. So last year, it's all about operational, we need to do all we can do, and so we brought the meals to the classroom, but there's a lot of USDA, a lot of rules and training around that for everybody who does that, and so we had 200 staff members that needed a certain amount of specific training, and it just wasn't a recipe for success. And the USDA kind of was a little lax last year, but they put several messages out this year that you must follow the rules as far as how you give a meal and how you count a reimbursable meal. And believe it or not, you have to know the different parts of a meal, and so when you give a meal to a child, you're certifying that person has to know that it's got certain much protein and so many vegetables and stuff. And so the only way to make sure, effective way to make sure that we are obeying all those rules is to have the kids file through and get their lunch. It's really, it comes down to the people who are running the point of sale. That's all they do is food service, and that's all the training they get all the time. So it's not so much, when we ring a child up, it says $0. So, but we know that the meals are being handed out by a person who's completely trained and all the rules are being followed.
So you can't have a para carry meals down to the classroom with the person to hand them out. The person has to literally hand the bag to the student, then the para can help the student. And that's why I was with Jack, because we were timing the class sizes coming through with hot lunches and bagged lunches and how we were going to work that out. But that's one of the things that we have to do, that we're trying to make as concise and easy. And the kids were great. They were wonderful. But that's one of those things that we have to make sure happens.
Okay.
I say just, talking for 10 minutes.
Anything else for Tim? Tim, when are you going to start the budget process for
So
us?
putting a memo out this week to the principals, and so the process, Chapter 1 will come out. What's Chapter 1? We just have a couple different chapters, sort of background and stuff that we give out ahead of time, informational. We'll start that next board meeting, just kind of some basics of budgeting. And then the end of October, the last week in October, we haven't talked to you about this yet, but usually the last week in October, or the second to last week in October, the principals are meeting with board members. So plan on that. I think it's the week of the 20th, but I'll confirm that in the next couple days. So we're starting soon. Basically, the principals have between like Monday or so until the first week in October, second week in October, to meet with Joanne. So they got about a month to put their budget together. And then we present it to you. Starting.
Thank you. Moving on to committee updates. Finance and Facilities met on Thursday. Aaron, would you like to report out what you haven't already?
I would love to. We talked about the technology bid for more computers and laptops. Those are all in the budget, and they came in under budget. We talked about the buses, and we're getting 5 buses. That was all in budget as well. Talked about summer projects. Dana went through all the summer projects and what they got done and what they're still trying to finish up. Then we went into the track. Talked about, like I said already, the larger track versus the normal size track. We went into fundraising a little bit. We went over the ESSER projects, conditional approvals, and then we talked about the SAU boiler a little bit, which we're going to get into here later. And then we scheduled our next meeting for October 7th at 4 p.m.
Thank you. Questions? The Policy Committee will meet next on October 12th. EC meets next on September 20th. PNN will be working next week, I guess, the week of September 14th. Tammy, is there anything to report out there yet? Anything you want to say?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Student Wellness Advisory Committee next meets October 6th. Harvard Area Career Technical Center, Joanne reported on, and we'll meet next November 16th. Area meets again on October 26th. And the City School Joint Task Force meets on October 21st.
A few other dates I thought you would want to add is November 20th. Tim, I think that's correct from your note today, is going to be the meeting where we discuss our budget. We meet the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And we meet here, and we usually have light breakfast, and then each of the schools presents their budget for board consideration. So please put onto your calendars Saturday, November 20th. And I would like to have board approval that we're not meeting the 24th, because the 24th is the Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving, and we haven't traditionally met then. But I put them in so I can ask the board if they want to keep that date or take that date out. Richard, do people have a preference to take that date out?
What's the consensus? Can we get away without meeting the day before Thanksgiving?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
we'll do that just by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
New business. Discussion on the City of Lebanon proposal to acquire the Sem Hill building.
I can give a little background if you'd like.
Please.
I was contacted a couple months ago by the city manager, Sean Mulholland, that city council members and some board members were talking about the potential of the city having more use of Seminary Hill. And so I don't have a lot more information other than that at this point. The proposal was put forward to the school board, which I forwarded back on June 3rd. So that outlines what they were asking to do. And then I looked into the legalities of it, and that information is right here in the packet, that the board does not have the authority to sell or hand over the Seminary Hill building without voter approval of 3/5. And we also have to have a warrant article that says that the community supports, the voters support a long-term lease. So you have to have both, because you can't just approve the handing over of the building but not approval of paying the lease to the city. Because my understanding is the city wants to do work on the building, and they would charge us, the school, to lease space in that, in the building. And they would take over all the facilities and things like that. Also included in the packet is a month by month. We went March 2018, and what I want to point out is the way it prints out of the system. You almost have to look at each column and go down and look at the date. So March 1st is pretty clear because underneath it is the 8th in the box. That's the date. And there's the 2nd, then there's a Saturday. The 5th is clear to the 12th. It goes through that way. But if you look at March 14th, it actually continues on to the next page. So you almost have to look at your pages a little bit like this, as far as the columns going down. I just wanted to point that out. And then we have other activities that are in there, or were in there, that we're considering coming back in. One of the things is we had the Upper Valley rowing equipment, and all of that was there for quite a long time. We now are using the upper library for our adult ed ESL programs in the evenings, Four Winds training, and also Google Apps events, and the SAU Superintendent's seminar that I've talked to you about a couple times. Like, those projects might not have fallen in those years, but those are things that happen. I just thought it would be useful for people to be able to see the kinds of activities that do go on in the building. And when I held our SAU meeting today, I just mentioned to folks that they should enter in when we use space, because sometimes we don't. We just say, oh, we'll just meet, but we don't put it in. And if we're looking at leasing, we want to be very clear with the, like, this room is used all the time, or, oh, that's right, we use the library, but we don't really think about it. So we're going to, as a team, do a better job of making sure that we schedule our rooms in advance. I did reach out after finance and facilities conversation to the city manager to see if he might like to come to an October board meeting to just talk about what they're proposing beyond this letter, because I don't have a lot of information beyond that. And then if it's something that the board would want to consider, possibly having negotiations, as we talked about, through P&N, because that is like a negotiating subset. But in talking with Richard, we thought it would be good to have the city manager, perhaps the mayor, come and talk to all the board members, so everyone has the same information before going into a negotiations type, the negotiations committee. And we'd only go in that direction if the board wanted us to. But I think the important thing is about the warrant articles, and you have to get the vote to do that. In timeline with Tim Ball, we usually start drafting warrant articles in November, get them approved December, because we have our deliberative session, and we have to, there's a term where you have to post your warrant articles and do all of that. So time is of the essence and you have to understand all the moving parts and pieces before making a decision. So I just wanted to give you all the information that I have. And is there information you wanted to add to that, or anybody else?
Not from me.
Okay.
Questions for
Sorry,
Joanne?
we might have the same question. Do you have a sense of how expensive a lease is? I mean, if we turn over the building and then we have to lease, so.
There's not been a conversation about that. The number, we were asked for finance and facilities, how much it costs, soup to nuts, to run the SAU, the whole building, and it's about $140,000. That's it, an entire year. So if you're looking at a teacher who's been here a long time, I was talking to Tim Ball about that, with their insurance. Some of our highest paid teachers make close to that, and that's what we are paying. One of the conversations we're having is that the boiler is 50 years old. So there's two options to go steam to steam, which isn't the most efficient, but that's a lesser cost than to go steam to, I'm looking at Aaron, hydro to water. Hydronic,
Yeah.
which is the higher cost, but in the long run, you're updating all of your systems, whereas we're running on some systems that are well over 50 years old with the piping in that building. So those are some of the conversations that we were having, and I don't have any more information from the city yet. But the number 140 was tossed around. I think that's because they heard that we pay about $140,000 a year, but that's with everything that we have in there. We're not leasing a small part of it. My biggest concern is not about us, it's about our students and the use of it. So if they are remodeling it, it takes them a couple of years. What do we do with the activities that go on in the gym? Our gyms are totally booked. If they're redoing the auditorium, our wet paint players practice there. What do we do with the wet paint players? You can't just go over to the Opera House because they're their own entity, and they've been kind because when we use the Opera House, most people come in and they have an event for a day or two and they're gone. They book us a chunk of time, whereas I think in the past the wet paint players might have, the only practice space was a cafeteria somewhere, and it's totally different to practice on a stage even if it's in that shape. So for me, those are the questions in my head is. And what the attorney advised was just, slow and steady approach. You want to make sure it works for the long term for everybody. There are some that started off positive and they weren't after time, and we appreciate the relationship we have with the city. I just definitely want to keep that. Tammy?
So, there's no reason to think necessarily that, we can't negotiate those pieces when we're negotiating the handover, right?
Yeah.
We could negotiate their construction time, and so it doesn't affect, if they're going to continue to allow us to use the places, the building in the way we need to use it, we can negotiate that at the time with them.
You could. The reality is you have a huge building, and we'd have to coordinate it with their architects because we wouldn't have any say. You can try to negotiate it, but we know that this is much bigger than a kitchen reno or a classroom reno, and that contractors, they're hard to know. So how do you really hold them accountable if their contractor says, well, we can't really do it then, but we can do it here? But you're right. All those things we should put in and articulate, and that can only help a relationship if you're out in front of it, than not saying something and feeling as though somebody's not holding the line. And I value the relationship we have, and I just want to make sure that we keep it.
And the other piece, they indicated that they've done this with us. So they've given us property for free? In the letter, it indicates that it's been like that
Do you
in the
know of
past.
anything that the city gave us, Tim?
I think it's in one of his, this is consistent with previous precedents in which the city transferred property to the school district. So I was curious how this worked before.
I'm unfamiliar.
I don't know.
I'm not saying it's not accurate. I don't think that's something we could look into. Do you remember something before we came on?
Does this have something to do with property transfers surrounding the construction of this building, perhaps? Or, there was some other What was there were a couple really small parcels of land that
Abutting the rail trail,
district-
there was one, I thought, the end of the rail trail,
Yeah,
but I don't recall
yeah.
how the city took it over but I don't know that it came to the school district, or I wasn't
We
familiar.
had a couple small parcels
Yeah.
like that the board looked at sometime in the last 10 years. I don't remember when, but that could be what they were, that's a good question to
Yeah.
ask.
I mean, I'm
there
certainly
was-
interested in continuing the conversation with them. I mean, getting
There was a
some of these-
transfer of this little turn area out here that was, I think it was on the warrant.
But that was us to them.
It was us to them, right?
Yeah.
But I
So
looked up
the-
that
yeah.
RSA quotes, and it specifically talks about buildings, and it specifically excludes,
You can
I
ask.
think it says.
Yeah, it definitely says they did it with us.
When did the district acquire those wetlands over off Old Pine Hill Cemetery?
My understanding that was somewhere around the obtaining of this land.
Right,
because it was-
right.
So somewhere around the 2010 timeframe, but I'm not sure when.
Yeah. Good question to ask, though.
Yeah.
MJ?
So I have a question. When we're looking at this calendar, to just kind of frame it, there's several activities that take place in the gym or the auditorium that aren't affiliated with the district, like adult rugby, summer theater, Lebanon youth baseball. Are these revenue-generating activities for us?
Yes.
If they pay rent for the gym?
Yes. And there's a fee structure that's set up that's very specific that we worked on our first year here and updated. But yes, depending on the type of, I don't want to say agency, but the type of group that's using it, there's different fee structures. And then if we don't have a custodian in place, we charge them for custodial services, if we can get a custodian that's willing to come in, if it's like a weekend or something like that. And Dana would have the best understanding of how much revenue it generates. I don't know off the top of my
The
head.
one caveat is that, if it's a rec program from the town, the rec program, we typically don't charge them unless we have extra fees. So if there's a club in there using it, we'll charge them. But there's a whole fee structure, but the rec department, we typically, there's not a charge for using our space. It's,
So is that something as part of, if we go forward with this, something that we, the board, can see is the fee structure, so we can kind of see what.
it's in policy, it's KF and KFR, you can read it now.
But that doesn't, just the fee structure doesn't necessarily tell us what generates for money. I think
No,
she's wondering
yeah,
what the
we can
revenue to
pull
us.
that. The same
Yeah.
program that gave that calendar gives you how much money we got in. On my end, it goes into like there's a rental column, so this year we didn't make a lot of rental. I can show you that number when we do the budget.
But even in the past, Tim, I
But
don't
in the
recall
past, we
that
can
being
look
a
it up.
major item.
Yeah,
right?
we've gotten some good rental numbers off of that in the past.
I'd be
That's
curious.
history, because obviously last year was an anomaly.
Yeah.
We probably didn't do a lot of renting in there.
No, that's why I went like the year before.
Exactly. It's kind of helpful to bring it from.
Sure. We can do that.
Yeah.
I also think this, just for purposes of people understanding it, that it might be helpful also to put this in a form of, these are district things that happen, these are sports things that happen, these are meetings that, this is a very difficult thing to read, I think. And if we want to sort of be clear about the kinds of things that happen, and again, these are fee-inducing things, these revenue generating, that's the word I want. These are revenue generating things. So just even a sort of summary sheet of what's happening with this big packet might be helpful, so that when we're talking to the city, we're all talking about the same thing, as opposed to them having to read down these lines and figure out what all these things refer to.
Tim, can you have Dana work on that, please?
And do we have more recent data than 2018, 2019?
Yes, but because of COVID, we weren't allowing people in the building, so it wasn't really accurate.
Yep, never mind.
That's why I went back.
All right. How quickly we forget.
Would it be also possible, I know we're not like totally talking about this right now, but, the boiler is a big issue. And how they described it is also kind of environmental, which route you go, and then, who knows in an old building what else needs to happen. So I think I'm maybe less concerned about I don't know, owning it or not owning it, but who's the responsibility of all the repairs that are going to be coming over the next while. So I don't know if the facilities has anything from the SAU building on their long-term list of stuff that's coming up. I know the boiler was a bit of a surprise, but as a 50-year-old.
Well, the boiler was in the FIP for a long time.
Oh, it was?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. It was a matter of when.
Okay.
And when we got through to this last year where we didn't have heat, or we had to send
Yeah.
people home.
Yeah.
So it moved up the urgency
Okay.
list. And then we had an outside person come in and do a full analysis of it. And then the next step would be, just like we talked today about the design plan, we're on hold until the board says, go ahead, because you have to get the design plan, the permit, or not. So we're waiting to know what our next steps should be with that.
So the
project.
boiler, solving the boiler issue is also connected to the building, turning over the building or keeping the building, because either we pay
Potentially.
for it or the city pays for it. And you need to know before the winter. I mean, we're approaching,
Well, that's why
Peak season.
that's why we're trying to have this conversation,
Okay.
because we're well aware of, we need to do our design
Yeah.
work, we need to get the RFQs out, we need to get somebody who's willing to do the work
Right.
this summer if we're going to go ahead with that project. And that's why there's two cost things, because we certainly don't want to make a decision about owning the SAU simply because of the boiler. I think it's a point of conversation. Do we want to put money in it if the board is going to have some kind of partnership with the city and they take over the facilities? So that's why it all compounds into like this conversation, because the boiler has also been conditionally approved through ESSER. So that's like another thing that Tim will have on the list. That's the one I said out loud to you. I'm like, we're missing one. It was the boiler.
yeah.
But once again, we just don't know what the final thing is going to be. But that was also one of the things under the list. So I think after they come and kind of give us a better idea of what their thinking is, that would be helpful for us, I know.
One of the arguments that's been made in sort of these informal discussions, is the city saying, well, why would you invest in redoing the boiler when the city takes it over? The city pays for doing that, along with a lot of other things like insulation and new windows and that sort of thing. But I'm not sure that, to your point, I'm not sure it necessarily has to be a binary decision. I mean, this could be part of the of something we talked about early on. It doesn't necessarily is if the city spends, if the district spends money to update the boiler. I mean, that may not be inconsistent with what the city would have done. And so there may be something to bargain over there as well. I don't know. My point is, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. But we'll see.
Steve has something.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. It sounds like regardless of which way we go, whatever work has to be done wouldn't be till after the winter. Is that correct? As winter's coming up.
At this point, the other constraint we have that we're always battling is just the construction market. So, yeah, so.
Right. So is there a contingency? Will the boiler in its current state get us through this winter?
Yeah, I used to be in the fuel business, and you get people questioning the lack, like, will my boiler last? I mean, there's no, it's old, it's inefficient, there's leaks popping up in the piping, and the boiler has been fixed, I think, 3 times last year, and we had 3 or 4 leaks too. So, short answer is that, we'll make it last. It's not like it's got a cracked section or whatever, so it's not going to be dead unless something tragic happens, but it might break 4 or 5, 6 times this time, and every year it gets more inefficient. So, I mean, we would have liked to replace it before this winter started, but not just this funding discussion. It's a matter of how long it takes plans and trying to get contractors. So when Dana started calling around about this last spring, people were like, yeah, I'm booked up, sorry. So there's going to be a longer lead time than we would like just because of the reality of the situation.
So according to their proposal, so we're basically choosing 6B, right? They said we would like to begin formal discussions with the school district. This could occur in one of 2 different ways. A, utilize the already existing joint school city task force, or B, I and a select number of city councilors would meet with the school board to discuss this proposal and next steps, right? So that's what we're That's our response to this, is we're coming back and saying,
Yeah, when he reached out, I said to him, we haven't had a board discussion since you set this, because we just had the retreat. And that I would bring it back at this meeting to have this conversation. I invited him to come so everyone on the board could hear it. And our thinking is have PNN, which is a subset of our negotiating group of the board, be the negotiators with whoever they bring forward for the city. And then keep people posted, just like we do with our other committees, about the work that's getting done, so the public can hear the updates probably on a monthly basis. But that's only if this board wants to go forward with all of that work, so.
Is the city aware of the findings of our legal counsel?
Of the what?
Our legal counsel?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, to your point, Lil, like I said before, I get leery of these artificially binary choices when they say can occur in one of two different ways. It ain't necessarily so. I mean, it could be both, or there could be other avenues as well,
right,
so.
I think that's true, and I think but really, so the ball is in our court, right? So where do we want to take the ball, right? And
Right.
these are the options that they've given us, which we can do. It looks like we are leaning towards B at this point, because we're having them come to a full board meeting and talk about this, right?
Well, I just don't think having a piece of paper gives me as a superintendent any idea of what they're really proposing. So to me, that's not we're going to go ahead with it. It's, can you explain what your proposal actually is, so the public hears it and the board hears it. And then I think after that, the board would let us know if we'd go into a non-public because it's about the building, and then the board would let us know the next steps that we should take.
So are they coming to the next meeting?
He hasn't responded. He might not have read my email, but I asked him to come in October.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Because the next meeting, we also have the consultant coming to review the strategic plan survey. So there's just quite a lot on our plates to try to chunk and keep things moving.
I think one thing we didn't talk about yet, but we've talked around it. In finance and facilities, we talked about when they do come, that we have all these questions collected for them, questions that have come up now, right? That we've just asked about, like what are you talking about with the other property, and what would we do in these instances? If we could get those questions to them in advance so that they can have
Yeah, if
informed
board members email me, I'll create a Google Doc that I can share. So just email them to me and copy Richard. We've done this in the past. We kind of go through, and if there's duplicates, we make it cleaner. I would think getting those questions to me in the next week or two would be really beneficial. Gives them time to respond.
This is going to be useful, too. I mean, whatever shortcomings there are in this display, it's better.
Yeah, this was
better than
this.
better than the 40 pages of narrative.
every time. Just
Yeah, we'll keep going with it.
Yep. Yeah, but they need to see this, because this is one of your major concerns, right, is the gym and the auditorium.
It's the students and, how it's going to impact them. And it goes back to how much they can guarantee what they're going to actually do with the building.
Hey, Dick,
Anything, yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
can we get a list of rooms or usable spaces in the SAU building so that we know if they're asking for 5 rooms, if we can do that or not?
Yeah, what they are asking for?
No, what
Or-
we have. Can we just get a list of what we have available and what,
Yeah,
that we can compare to what we're using?
yes.
Anything else on this topic? This has been very helpful. Thank you. That takes care of new business. Future agenda items, board member recommendations or questions.
I did mention that Amanda Silver will be here the 22nd, and I know, Richard, that you will not be at that meeting. You'll
Right.
be away. And just a quick update, I can't remember off the top of my head, we had around 60 or so people respond to the survey, which is lower than what we usually have, but not surprising because of the end of the year timing. We'll have multiple tools that we'll be using throughout the year to get that data. I'll send the analysis out in advance so you have a chance to look at it. But the one thing is, in order to save money, I entered it into School Monkey, and when I did the rankings, you're supposed to click the button to the right. Instead of it going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I say that because when you look at the data, your brain automatically goes, the higher the number, the better. But it's actually the lower the score, the more effective it was. And just look out for, like, there's 2 or 3 questions that has like a double negative. I mentioned that because we talked a lot of it at the Momentum meeting, and we shared all of the things that we learned from the survey. So I just wanted you to know about that.
Thanks. Lisa, did you want to bring up your topic, or was that dealt with before?
I think that I'm going to wait until we get a little bit more information from the DOE, and after that.
So the question was, you maybe just want to say.
So I made the query about the InfoSnap gender and all of the forms having to do with the entire school district, because we're in a new world of multiple gender identities right now. We have children who are who have always been here but are finally presenting themselves, and the statistics go like this: 10 to 15% of children who don't fit into the male or female gender assignment are 40% more likely to commit suicide. And really the most important thing for me, and I hope for all of us, is to simply make a space enunciating that they actually exist. So I would like to, at some point, and apparently the Department of Education for New Hampshire hasn't.
Well, currently, they are basing it on those 2 genders. I don't know what conversations they've had, but we do so much reporting that we have to kind of keep some consistency with the state, but internally, we could create a separate piece. So in the future with Power School registration, we could say, based on the DOE, we need to ask this question. Internally, for school use, we could add additional things. And that way, I think it shows the support for parents who are filling it out, and an understanding that we are living in the context of federal and state reporting that use data in a certain way.
So there's other places where those strict male, female questions are being asked in. When you apply to be in a club, when you apply to be in a sport, when you apply, for almost anything having to do with the district currently.
Those are the internal
You have
ones I think
those
we
2
can
things, and I
update.
know that for my own self in my work, we haven't made those changes, but we are talking about making them. We're talking about doing an audit. And so I just brought it to her to say, I was really grateful that the medical forms had been entered into InfoSnap, because it made it so much faster to register the kids. It took me like almost an hour less to register them for all the different forms, and it was all there, and it was lovely. And then I noticed the gender assignments and started to wonder, where are we with this, and are we getting ready to go somewhere? Because it feels like the time is presently happening that we need to make a move that isn't just male, female. We need more options. I don't even know what it would look like for my own self in my work. We haven't figured that out. We've just started using more visual signs for bathrooms. So whatever looks okay is how whatever bathroom you might use. So it's more like an awareness thing, and I guess we can start to see the forms that come to our homes and have a reckoning at some other time, I guess, because we're so busy. But the Department of Education, we may want to write a letter requesting this change, because I think it's absolutely time. I've traveled all summer and on both coasts have met children who, have assigned themselves however they want, and it's happening, and they're here. And so I guess to protect them most of all is my concern. So that's it.
Thanks. Any other future agenda items, recommendations, questions? Okay, important dates, district announcements. Next board meeting is September the 22nd. Various committee dates are listed in the agenda, and everyone needs to mark their calendar for Saturday, the 20th of November, for our maybe day-long budget meeting. Any other business? Motion to adjourn. Come on, somebody do it.
Are you kidding me?
Moved by MJ.
I second it.
Somebody second it?
I'll second it.
Second by Lisa. All in favor? Unanimous. We are adjourned.
Looking for signatures anyway, yeah? Why are you so quiet?